Well, good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Healthier Communities and Older People Overview and Scrutiny panel. Can I apologise that we are having IT problems in the council chamber, and you can see a logo as opposed to a clear image of me, which is probably to your better for your eyes. But we've tried to resolve that issue and we haven't been able to do so. However, it is my view that because people can clearly hear and that they can see, if I wave my hand, that they can see that there's somebody behind the logo. I'm a bit like the man in the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, but I can assure you I am here and we're going to press on and conduct our business. So item 1 is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Chair, we've had apologies from Councillor Helen Dollimore, who's joining us online but is not able to be present this evening. And we've had, that's it, Chair, thank you. Oh, apologies for lateness from Councillor Nigel Bembo.
If I can say welcome to Helen and thank you for making the effort to attend via Zoom. Helena did contact me to explain that she had tested positive and was self-isolating, and this is the next best thing. But we do have Joan here as her substitute, and we're grateful to her for attending at short notice. Okay, so
sorry, Chair. Chair, could I just say if my virtual attendance could be recorded by Stella, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
That's done. Item 2 is declarations of pecuniary interest. Are there any declarations? That's good. Item 3 are the minutes of the previous meeting. Are they agreed? Item 4 is developing a new health and wellbeing hub in Mitcham, and we've got Mark Creelman and Mike Proctor who are going to introduce this presentation for us. Mark, are you kicking off?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chair. Stella, do we have the slide deck, or do I just assume that it's been sent round and talk to it?
Didn't prepare it because I didn't know you wanted me to show the slides, but the councillors do have them in their agenda pack. Okay.
Shall I share my screen then? I think I can. Hopefully, I've got the technological know-how to share my screen, and hopefully you can see that now. I'll probably look at Councillor Dollimore, who's the only person I can see on my screen to tell me that's yes. That's fantastic, great. So just to say, this is a relatively quick presentation, and we just wanted to give you an overview of the progress around the Health and Wellbeing Hub in Merton, and particularly East Merton, because we're working with our health and care partners to look at delivering care in different ways for local residents. Now, I know that this has been long-standing, and we are really keen that we progress this relatively quickly and robustly going forward, because we do know that the people of Mitcham particularly and the surrounding areas experience unacceptable inequalities. We know that from our diabetes rates, our obesity rates, our life expectancy, but also our experience of COVID and the vaccination uptake as well. We are supporting people with long-term conditions through things like the social prescribing service, which are great services and are indeed winning awards, but actually there really is a need for us to have local services delivered locally for people and with the community. So the idea is really that the hub won't be just a building, but it will be somewhere to help the community connect, stay healthy, support each other, and from the surrounding areas, and also act as a signpost to other services throughout the borough. It is a priority for us now, and we've recently started refreshing our local Merton Health and Care Plan, and this really is one of the key tenets of that plan, and we will track our progress over the next 2 years. Now, there has been lots of previous work being done prior to my joining, but just to say that we are required to basically review the possible locations that were previously looked at in 2015, and those are the Wilson, Butchers Close and Sibthorpe Road. Now, the Wilson is the NHS preferred option, and I want to be really clear about that because of a number of reasons. Firstly, we've secured NHS funding from NHS Property Services, but also the CCG will be investing in it as well. And then therefore, the reason it's our preferred option is that gives us a much clearer path to delivering the hub. The other options are not owned by the NHS, and so therefore it could be more complicated. We also think the size of the Wilson lends itself to expanding services in the future as well. And we're currently hosting a mobile MRI scanner on the site, but we are also talking to our community diagnostic workstream hubs at central southwest London about the possibility of expanding that even more in the future. What will be provided at the hub? Well, basically, we know that a lot has changed as we go through this program, and we want to make sure that we are reflecting the needs of the local community. But things to take into account are, that we work in very different ways now. There's a combination of face-to-face, but also remote working as well. And that's meant we've had to kind of relook at our approach. The current vision is that we provide healthcare and wellbeing services in a very integrated way, complementing and enhancing services in the area that are already there, but actually really looking at what the needs are, particularly around things like children and young people's mental health services, adult mental health services, and just making sure that we're building the services with the community and in line with the community as well. It will have outside community space, and we've already started working on a community garden, and there will be community rooms and rooms for multidisciplinary teams. We want to continue the dialogue. We must always keep looking at what we are putting there and making sure that it's relevant for the local communities. So the programme timelines, and I do know that this has been round the houses many times, but NHS building projects do take time and there's still a long road ahead. So I want to be kind of transparent about that. The programme was delayed in 1819 when the LIFT programme ended. And then we've also had the COVID pandemic, which has kind of put halt to quite a lot of the progress over the last 2 years. However, since then, we have now, in the last 5 months, secured the funding from Property Services and from the CCG, and we are moving now to developing an outline business case, the options appraisal, and we hope to do the options appraisal in the month of February, and that's going to be a series of workshops. The options appraisal will then go into the outline business case, and that should take between 18 to 24 months. Just to say that finally, we know that we don't need to wait for a new building to make services happen for local people. So we are really keen to keep developing services for the community on the Wilson site. We're currently using it as a vaccination centre, and when we did think we were going to pull away, actually the ask around vaccinations changed, particularly around the booster. So again, we need to be relatively fluid about how we use it going forward. But we are really keen, and we do think it's a really exciting space at the Wilson to host a delivery of a host of wellbeing services, including things like social prescribing. We are going to work with key stakeholders across the month of February, and we're organising 3 workshops to basically look at the 3 options, Sibthorpe Road, Butchers Close and the Wilson, and by the end of February we will have the recommended site to go forward, but I'd like to emphasise the NHS preferred site is the Wilson. I've mentioned about the diagnostic centres, and we brought it here basically to update, but also to illustrate that this is a very important part of our planning going forward, and that we want to report back to the overview and scrutiny on a regular basis. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mark. Does Mike want to say anything? Or
So it isn't Mike, and Mike's my deputy. So actually,
Right.
Unfortunately, you've only got me today. So
Okay, well, one is better than none. I'll open it up to questions.
I'll stop sharing.
Linda.
Thanks very much. I want to be positive because I feel very negative. I'm sorry to say it. In 2010, I was cabinet member. We discussed all this. Wilson was a preferred site. The Nelson site went ahead, where clearly the high need was in the Mitcham area, and it's 12 years later. And it's going to be 2 more years before, from what you've just said, before we actually get in. What my concern is the money there? Why do we really, who suggests we have to go through this whole process again? It seems bonkers. The Wilson's a preferred site. So why do we have to waste time going through those 3 options when we've been through it all before? Just seems mental. But it's, for me, is the money there? Because if it isn't there, then nothing's going to happen. And this has been kicked into the long grass for 12 years, and it really isn't good enough. But I'm glad something's happening. So I want to be positive about what's happening. But I'm not trusting hard for this.
Mark, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, can I respond? So I am aware that this has been going around the houses for a very long time, hence the introduction to my presentation. I do think that previously the funding came from multiple sources, so was therefore slightly more complicated and slightly more at risk. We have confirmation from NHS Property Services and the CCG. So it's important to say that the CCG is also putting money into this, and it's not from external sources. So it is internal NHS resources, and we have that commitment. So I do understand your frustration, and particularly if it's over 12 years old. But the funding is there, and we are really keen to move this forward. In terms of just re-looking at the 3 options, that will take the month of February, so it shouldn't be delaying it a long time, and it is a requirement, unfortunately, of the kind of policy around better business cases. So we just need to make sure that we have double-checked the site, but we do anticipate that those 3 workshops will do that piece of work, and then we can move on to the outline business case.
Mark, can I just add my voice to that? Because
yeah, certainly.
Like Linda, I have been an elected member of this authority for a very long time. In fact, we were both elected in 1986. So we are in our 36th year serving as members. And I have to say that throughout that time, I've heard NHS officials express their concern about health inequalities time after time. And in your overview of your plans, you've referred specifically to life expectancy in Cricket Green compared to Merton Park. And yet, despite your, and not just yours, but repeated NHS assurances that this is a really serious problem that you want to tackle, whenever decisions are made, and Linda's already raised the decision about the Wilson and the Nelson. The other ward that you've referred to is right next to, I don't know if it's actually in the ward, Peter, but it's right on the boundary of Merton Park. So what we've got is a decision when NHS resources are available, that they've been made available in the area where the problem is. You're referring to life expectancy of higher life expectancy in the area that has been given provision, and lower life expectancy in the area that has been consistently overlooked. And of course, from my perspective, it's not just about this particular issue, but when we see a decision made about St Helier Hospital, we have a reference to health inequalities, and yet the decision is made to move A&E and maternity services away from the most deprived areas to Belmont, which is one of the most affluent areas. And so the talk is very impressive, but the action and the resources are not following. And I think you really do need to understand the frustration of those of us that have been here for a while and are hearing this for the umpteenth time. And you also need to understand that the community that I represent is one of those deprived communities, and I will not stop sticking up for those people and making sure that they get their fair share of local resources. So my question is, when you talked about the timetable, you've talked about making a decision in February. Why does it then need to take 18 to 24 months after that, given all the time and effort and discussion that has been held over at least 12 years? Why can't, if the money's there, why can't we just get on and do it? Why can't we accelerate this process? When we need to build emergency facilities at St George's Hospital to cope with COVID, they are done overnight. Why can't we show the same urgency to tackle the issue of health inequalities that's been here for so long?
Okay, so firstly, I think is to acknowledge the frustration, because I think actually you're absolutely right. This should not be taking 12 years to have this conversation. The rationale, just in terms of the commitment and why this may be different, is because I do think that we have secured the funding, and also we are not looking for external sources. It is NHS funding, and so therefore we are very clear that not just from NHS Property Services, but also I think the CCG saying, well, actually, we'll put money into it too. Actually, we will invest in this so that people see this as a serious way forward. I think in terms of some of the statistics, absolutely, they speak for themselves. So I'm not going to kind of argue back on that one at all. I think in terms of, unfortunately, when we are spending millions of pounds of taxpayers' money within the NHS, there is a process that we have to go through. Now, I know that our council colleagues who are around the table here are really keen that we get this done as quickly as possible. And there are two things that myself, I will chair a programme board going forward, but I will co-chair it with John Morgan, who's on this meeting as well, to make sure that our council colleagues are involved, but also that we will try to demand things are done as quickly as they possibly can. But it does lend itself to a time period of kind of up to 18 months to 2 years. Hence my comments about it shouldn't stop us in delivering some services absolutely to those vulnerable and deprived communities. And we are already talking about some of the initiatives around health on the high street with Dagmar, just around how we take some of our services out into the communities that need them most. I think also COVID's taught us a lot, even more, about those inequalities, and we need to address those. So I don't disagree with anything that you said. I think that all I can say is that from my perspective, the commitment is there because of the money. We have to go through due process, but we can do a lot in the background about other services to address some of the inequalities there as well.
Are there any other questions from members? Peter. Oh, Helena. Sorry, I didn't see you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. We described this as a health and wellbeing hub. I just wondered if you could shed any light on what that means in reality, and whether, I'm concerned that if we have a facility and we have funding, will this provide the services that residents would have been used to receiving at, say, a walk-in centre? And if so, I think it's important that we use the most accessible language, because we have to remember that not all of our residents are familiar with, some of the acronyms and the jargon used by NHS. Yeah,
so thank you for that. I think in terms of what do we mean by a health and wellbeing hub? So at the moment, what we are looking at is children and young people's mental health services adult mental health services, social prescribing, some wellbeing services such as the community garden. And we want to make sure that we're building on that. So actually, in terms of the conversation around community diagnostics, actually, what is the health of the population around what diagnostics would actually most benefit those? So I think over the time, the business case, we keep reviewing actually what services are going in there, but we can build on them as well. So it's not just about a drop-in or a kind of traditional health setting. It's about a community setting that is kind of owned by the community with health services and wellbeing services running alongside it. Does that answer your question, Councillor Dollymore? But I do agree about the language as well. We need to make sure that we're not doing NHS speak, don't we? Because many people just don't get that, and we end up talking like managers. So I take that point, and I will take that point back to the programme board.
Thank you, Mark. You partially answered my question, but I'm still struggling to see, you know, if I am describing to a resident what we hope they will be able to access and their family will be able to access under this roof, what are we looking at?
Okay, so currently the thinking is around, so if your child has perhaps mental health issues, there will be a resource there that can be tapped into and referred into. The same again with adult mental health. We talk about community hub services for adult mental health to kind of avoid crisis admissions, etc. So there could be a community mental health hub there. Social prescribing is often about diagnosing what the issues are for an individual and making sure that we're referring them into the right community organisations to support them, or indeed referring them back into traditional health services and social care services. So it's that kind of thing that we're currently planning, yeah. But I think, again, it's part of the discussion with local communities as to what they think would be of most benefit to the local population.
I understand. And if there is a funding package for the facilities to be provided, does that mean the NHS has also guaranteed the funding for mental health services, for example, or the services we intend to create a space for? Because I think that the building itself is one step along the way. The funding for these services, which we all know have been decimated in recent years and are struggling and with longer waiting lists. So how are we going to make sure it has the injection to actually give people the services they need?
Yeah, and I think as we've established the programme board, but also as we are talking to stakeholders in the workshops, we need to make sure that all providers, etc., that we're incorporating into the centre and the hub are actually on board as well. And at the moment, they absolutely are. You know, as we go through the next year or so, we need to ensure that that remains in place. And I do think we're beginning to deliver services in a different way, and that really is a kind of community-based setting for the delivery of services. And it's not just about kind of traditional health. We need to make sure that we're kind of providing holistic services for people as well. So I think the opportunities are really there. We need to drive forward now with making sure that that we get the place established and set up as quickly as we possibly can.
I just wanted to ask about social prescribing, because I suspect that that's going to be something that community voluntary groups will be expecting to take on. And what sort of funding are we talking about there? And is there, what I think would be interested from a scrutiny point of view is actually understanding how that's going to work and whether those organisations that are taking that responsibility on are actually being properly supported financially.
Thank you for that. So I think there's probably two comments there. I think a social prescribing service within Merton is actually a kind of combination of community services and health services coming together and working together. We have started a dialogue to make sure that social prescribing is only going to be as good as the people it can refer into, and making sure that the voluntary organisations at the end of the referral route have both the funding, the capacity and the capability to meet the needs of the people that we're referring into. So we are doing a piece of work about looking at that and making sure that we have the funding in the right place to actually address the need and support people that come through the social prescribing route. But I would say social prescribing in Merton is a great service. It's recently been to the Health and Wellbeing Board. It's been very well received. It is award-winning, but it still wants to progress even further and work more with the voluntary sector organisations. COVID taught us that our voluntary sector can do absolutely amazing things with and for the residents, and we really need to make sure that we are funding that appropriately.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I want to say I'm fully, you know, applaud this, you know, hope being set up to help in terms with the mental health issue. Over time, mental health is being you know, seen more and more as a norm, and people are finding ways to help. On a page 6, I've noticed under well-being steering group, you have a membership from the local community. How large is this group, and over a period of time, do you expect it will expand? And what happens if it becomes overwhelming? Would you be expanding or thank you?
I think in terms of the established services, when we do establish, I think in terms of mental health, what we are looking at again is a very different way of delivering mental health services through community hubs and through community leaders and community settings, because we do know that actually Black and people from an ethnic minority are really overrepresented in things like acute services. And so we need to put those preventative things in the community. Now, should those community services be incredibly popular? So that's, you know, firstly, that's a good thing because it means we are meeting needs, but actually would we then have to expand? Absolutely. So, you know, if you've got, if we have developed a service which is meeting the local needs, it's helping people avoid hospital admission, particularly in acute mental health, then we would look to replicate that not only in East Merton, but across the borough. And we do know that there are examples of that across other boroughs as well, that we are taking the learning from and kind of applying to Merton. So I think that would we expand? Yes, if the need arises.
I'd like to ask Mark, have you got any plans to provide a GP service there? I'm asking because close by to the Nelson, you've got Wimbledon, Mitcham Village, and there's quite a lot of elderly people there and in the surrounding areas. At the moment, they've got to get 2 buses to get to a GP. So I'm wondering if there are any plans to include a GP surgery there. Thank you.
So in the current kind of, this is the scope of what the health and wellbeing hub kind of traditional primary care services will be part and parcel, but it wasn't necessarily going to be a GP kind of a GP led service. What we wanted was a more community based service. That's something I can certainly take into the program board and for the program board to kind of discuss. But just to say that a lot of what did go into what was going to go into the at the time it was the Wilson, now it's the East Merton hub, and that was around adult mental health, children's mental health, etc. But it's something that, again, you wouldn't say no to, but we wouldn't necessarily be setting up a new practice on the site. What we might do is ask surrounding practices to do perhaps satellite clinics, etc., in the Wilson, depending again on need.
Are there any more questions? Okay, well, can I thank you, Mark, for your presentation and for answering our questions. And I'm sure you'll take those comments on board and do what you can to get things moving. And in the words of our Prime Minister, let's get it done.
It's a call to arms if ever I had one. Thank you.
Okay, so item 5 is the impact of COVID. This is a regular report, and Dagmar, I'd like to welcome you to the meeting and ask you to present your report, which we've all had copies of in advance.
Good evening, and thank you, Chair. If you bear with me, unfortunately, the slides are a bit out of date. So if you allow me, I will give you a quick verbal update of the current affair. Is that okay with you? Yeah.
Of course, we're more interested in the
so
position
as you're aware,
as it now is rather than as it was.
Well, that's what I assumed. So between Christmas and New Year, you will have heard London had extraordinarily high rates of Omicron. 1 in 10 people is the estimate. And infection rates remain really high. But the good news is, and is cautiously optimistic view is that they're not rising anymore and possibly having are leveling off. What we are particularly seeing is that in young and middle-aged adults, which made the peak between Christmas and New Year, those rates do level off. We had a surge of infections in the over 60s, which obviously really concerned us, but there are the signals are also positive in that they seem to level off. Where we are not sure is what's going to happen to children. Obviously, they've been back just a week now. So whether the previous Delta infections have given them enough immunity, we don't know. So we're waiting and seeing the impact. In terms of outbreaks, we had numerous outbreaks of infections in care homes and other adult social care settings, and Eileen obviously is here as well, so we've been absolutely eagle-eyed and ready with our support. The positive thing, and it is really feeling very different to last year, is this was mainly in staff, mainly asymptomatic, a little bit bleeding also into residents being affected, but again, mainly asymptomatic or mild disease. So that is a fundamentally different picture. Now, it doesn't mean it's easy, by absolutely no means. So staff absences are putting quite a lot of pressure, but all in all, the care homes have done a fantastic job. And I feel residents have been kept safe. In terms of hospitalizations, you are aware that is a really crucial marker. Hospitalizations with COVID have gone up, but what is a very important nuance is that hospitalization because of COVID symptoms have actually been much more stable. So what has happened is, because there's so much COVID in the community, lots of people that go to hospital for other reasons, like a broken arm, they all get screened now, and lots of those are found to also have COVID. Now that gives the hospital quite a headache because you need to do all the infection prevention and control, but it's a very different position to having lots of sick people with COVID, which we haven't got in hospital. And a very good marker for the severity of disease is the occupancy in intensive care, and particularly on mechanical ventilation, and those indicators have been stable. Now, it doesn't mean that the NHS isn't under pressure. We've got NHS colleagues on this call. The NHS is absolutely under pressure. Winter is always busy. Plus, in staff absences because of COVID. Not that the staff is particularly sick, but the staff obviously can't be in frontline roles. That puts a lot of pressure on the system. We have been really, really busy, particularly in the run-up of the Christmas holidays and all during the Christmas holidays, with supporting our NHS colleagues with the vaccination booster sprint. And it was phenomenal, volunteers dropping everything else and helping. Before Christmas and during Christmas holidays, really good uptake. This has now tailed off, but really large numbers vaccinated. The focus now on the vaccination program is slightly less breathless, and it is more about leaving nobody behind, because we still have particular groups, particularly cohorts, where the uptake is lower. And you will have heard the 12 to 15-year-olds is one of those cohorts across the whole of London, indeed, across the country. We haven't made the expected inroads, so there is another big push. The format is different, whereas for the big sprint before Christmas, it was big numbers. So in a few sites, the Wilson, the Nelson, the Centre Court, long opening times, lots of vaccinations. Now the emphasis is on much smaller sites, community pop-ups, working very, very closely with community leaders to gain trust. So it will be smaller numbers, but hopefully covering high-risk groups and groups we haven't engaged so much before. Also, good news is that the Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Community has given us some funding for vaccination champion programs. That is precisely to support what I've just said, working very closely with the community to leave nobody behind. And then finally, you probably will ask me, over the Christmas holiday, there were quite a lot of discussions around the lateral flow test shortage. We have actually managed pretty well in Merton. There were some supply issues, but we've got our libraries as a very reliable stockholders. We were lucky that we had got deliveries, not all what we'd ordered, but most, so we didn't completely run out. And we are absolutely advising the portals are open, so for people to use the portal, the home delivery service. But if push comes to shove and they're running out, there is stock that we hold and we can help out. So we have managed, and generally the supply chains are working better again. I leave it at that and open to question.
Thank you, Dagmar. Are there any questions to the Director of Public Health? Janice.
Yes, thank you, Dagmar, for the update. It's interesting that we're moving away now from the booster jab to the community. What was the percentage in Merton for the booster uptake, and how many percentage-wise do we still need to get first and second jabs for, if you have those statistics? Thank you.
Hi, thanks. In the slide set that I have presented, you've got the current numbers, the next lot of numbers I still have to get the quality assurance for. But roughly in the over 50s, the booster uptake is now 73%. So in comparison to elsewhere, that's not bad, but I pop it round and say that means 27% haven't had it, and that means we're not stopping yet. And so when we're saying that we're moving away from the booster, I possibly didn't make that clear enough. We are still opening absolutely for all vaccines, first dose, second dose, and booster. But what we are now focusing on is to offer the vaccination in more diverse sites rather than big sites. And I've got obviously the NHS colleagues on this call who really have done the absolutely hard work on this, and if they want to comment, they might have more figures up their sleeve.
Do any of our NHS colleagues want to add to what Dagmar has said?
So I think, hello, it's Mark again. Just to say that, so Dagmar's absolutely right, and I don't have the statistics in front of me. Sorry, I wasn't going. We do have them, and we could circulate them to the membership here, broken down kind of by the ward, etc. So I'm happy to go away and take that back as an action. Just to say that, just to support Dagmar's presentation as well, is that, you know, we really did do a massive sprint prior to Christmas, and that really was focused on PCN sites, mass vaccination sites, and pharmacists. Now we had a meeting today actually with again many of the people around this table to really look at how we get into those hard to reach communities, the communities that are not taking up the vaccine, whether it be first dose, second dose, or booster. And actually we are, you know, that evergreen offer of never leaving anyone behind still stands, and we will really ramp up some of our outreach and pop-up community vaccination clinics. But we do need to make sure that we are engaging with the communities so that actually when we do set up the clinics, people want to come forward and get the vaccination. And we have to work with communities about some of their perceptions, not just around the vaccination and its efficacy, but also about, you know, trust in the NHS, trust in services, trust. So we need to do an ongoing dialogue with communities really before I think we will see lots of those numbers changing to being vaccinated.
Thank you. Can I ask a question, Dagmar? And that is on the slide that gives the arrows indicating whether things are getting better or worse. You've given us the current inpatients in Southwest London hospitals of 223. That was, I appreciate that figure is now kind of perhaps a little out of date, but do you have any indication of what proportion have not been vaccinated?
I haven't got it up my sleeve. I've only got the verbal report. Indeed, we've just today had our Southwest London IMT, where we always have somebody from the NHS from the hospital, St George's Hospital, with us. And anecdotally, the majority of people with severe disease are unvaccinated or under-vaccinated. Yeah, I think that is a well understood fact now. So the majority who actually have their booster might still get infected, and you probably all will know some because it was so prevalent. But for those, it was either asymptomatic or a mild disease, not a serious disease ending up in ITU. And we have the feedback as well that they, in George's, for example, they've opened up several COVID wards. And he said when people reported, it has a very different feel because even on the COVID wards, much less oxygen is needed. So I think that is a really good sort of message in a way, and cautiously optimistic message.
Thank you. Is there any likelihood of us receiving reports, if we are going to get reports of COVID inpatients, whether we could identify the proportion that have been vaccinated or not?
I'm very much trying. We all want the same, so I will take it absolutely back, and I will always check out obviously what of the data can be shared and what not, but if I can share anything of that ilk, I will bring it to the next meeting.
Thank you, Dagmar. Are there any other questions? Sorry, Helena, your hand, when it comes up, is in a sort of a very pale yellow color, and it kind of blends in with the background. So I keep missing it, and people who can see it on a much bigger screen than I can are flagging up that you want to ask a question. So please go ahead.
No problem, Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Dagmar, and you know, just to extend our thanks to the team who I'm sure were working over Christmas, given the situation. My question really is about vaccinations. I think positives to take away are that, you know, myself as a vaccinator over Christmas, I've seen people coming forward for first doses or coming forward for delayed second doses. So people are coming, and I think our message to those people has to be, there's no judgment. Nobody would ask, why didn't you come sooner? Just come and you'll be treated like anyone else. And I think question mark that I have is around the vaccines for immunocompromised patients. So this is something that the NHS began a few months ago. And if you have a compromised immune system, usually because you have a particular condition, you might be receiving a particular kind of treatment like chemotherapy that reduces your immune system, you are entitled to a 4th dose of COVID. So your first 3 doses are normal doses, then you receive what is in effect a booster as a 4th dose. I just think the communication about this nationally has not been great, and that's no reflection on the local NHS. It's a national thing, but I think we need to do what we can locally to get the message out to fill those gaps. How are we spreading the word about that immunocompromised dose? Because I think particularly with short delays in the post and things at the moment, we cannot rely on something coming through from the GP by post or from the hospital consultant. So we need to spread the word. And as I understand it also, depending on the CCG area, they are also doing 4th doses for those who live with immunocompromised and those who regularly see immunocompromised patients. So perhaps you could just share a bit more about that so that colleagues who are in touch with residents can help get the message out as well.
Yeah, so I think it's a really good point. The high risk patients that you mentioned, obviously for them, the benefit of even a bit of increase in immunity is absolutely immense. So very, very important when we think about equity to think about the offer. So one way that we're trying to leave nobody behind is going through the PCN primary care lists of patients and actually calling them one by one. And so particularly high risk patients are very high on the agenda to be directly contacted. But I think your point is very well made. So thinking multiple channels, because it's like the Swiss cheese, you know, you then have a higher chance of not leaving anybody behind. So I will also speak again to my comms colleague to see can we reiterate that message in our channels.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this and the day. I struggling to understand that when people have jobs, even 3 jobs, they're still able have COVID, and some have a longer term of it. Meanwhile, there are some people who don't seem to catch anything at all. What's the difference between the 2 in your expertise? And the second question, as we're now heading in the next phase, probably in March, is learning how to live with it. And what's your opinion about this? Is this feasible? Thank you. Thank you.
Shall I give it a go, and maybe Mark can help as well? So with regards Nigel, to transmission, you're absolutely right. So the vaccination, particularly with Omicron, as we said, even if you have the booster, you're much less likely to transmit, but you can still transmit. So if you think about it, the genetic pressure for this virus and the variants to mutate is obviously to spread. And so this Omicron variant is pretty crafty in spreading. But what is really, really important is, and why we're pushing the vaccination so much, is that it does protect against serious disease. And while one can live with transmission, it is still problematic enough because people need to keep away, particularly from vulnerable people. We're in a completely different place with regards to serious disease. And so that links us then to your second question: how are we going to live with the disease? Obviously, I haven't got the crystal ball. And in a way, the Omicron variant, it's probably fair to say, took us a little bit from left field. We were staring at Delta. So for me, if you ask me as a professional, I really think the world in 2022, and the UK has to play their role, needs to vaccinate globally. We will not be able to be safe in our country if we just think we live in a bubble and we vaccinate ourselves out of it. And I think keeping very vigilant. So we are luckily endowed with really good scientific capability to keep an eye on other variants. But there is good news. If you compare, there is a recent publication about a survey of people's immunity across the population now in that survey, and it was a big number survey. Over 95% had antibodies, and that is now a mix of previous infections, various states of immunization. If you compare that with the beginning of the pandemic, where the whole population was immune naive, it's a completely different picture. So as I said at the beginning of my report, cautiously optimistic that we are learning to live with it.
Question: what are your thoughts about the tennis player just Fitch in Australia? Do you think he's right to go away by not having jabs and just go and play tennis?
Maybe chair that slightly outside.
Example.
Maybe can I say that slightly outside overview and scrutiny? Is that fair?
I think that is fair. It's more of a question for Melbourne Council than for Merton Council. But I'm sure we'll have some comments to make come the Wimbledon Championships next year, and we may have strict controls in place as to who we allow to enter the borough of Merton. We'll have to see. Thank you, Dagmar. Are there any other questions to Dagmar? Well, please, as we always do on these occasions, can I thank you and your team, and indeed that you've referred to NHS colleagues who've been in the front line of this really important work. And we'd like you all to go away and convey the thanks of the representatives of our local community for the extraordinary work that you have done. And we are extremely grateful for all your efforts. Okay, thank you, Dagmar. So item 6 is the business plan update. and Roger Kershaw is here to introduce it. And I assume, John, that you might want to add to Roger's presentation once he's dealt with the sort of financial background to this in terms of how it will affect adult social care.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, I'll start. And good evening, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity to attend to take you through the pack, which is rather an extensive pack. I appreciate there's a lot of detail in there, and it contains a lot of information for the committee to digest and to question. It contains obviously the savings targets, the savings proposals, together with the equality assessments, and of course details of unachievable savings, all down to the process of the medium-term financial strategy, which we are well advanced in terms of delivering. The pack also contains draft service plans, so there's plenty for that Scrutiny may wish to question myself and John on later. But what I thought I'd do at first is I thought I'd give you an outline of the budget position. The information is largely contained in the pack, but I thought as I'd go through, I would also give you a brief update on certain numbers where practical. So bear with me from that point of view. I mean, the first headline I suppose I would want to highlight is really just to report that we are expecting to be in a balanced budget position for 2022-23. But commonly with most medium-term financial strategies, there's still some work to do to balance future years of the MTFS. Members will see the details of community and housing proposed savings in the pack, totaling some 300,000 for 22-23 and some 800,000 for 23-24 respectively. So in addition, the pack also contains details of savings which are unlikely to be achieved for 2022-23 from earlier years, totaling some £980,000. Members may note that we've also had the provisional settlement, so I'm happy to update the committee on aspects of that where relevant. That came through sort of mid-December 2021. Well, nationally, there was an increase of some 0.5% in the settlement funding assessment, which really is summarising what we get for revenue support grant and business rates. And that's an increase of 0.5% for 22-23. The London Borough of Merton received overall, that was nationally, overall a 0.4% increase. It was slightly below the national average there. In addition, our core spending power is assumed to have risen by some 6.3% for 22-23. Now that's provided we adopt the council tax increase assumed by government, and indeed the increase in preset for adult social care. So that's 2% for council tax and 1% for adult social care. Pleasingly, the Improved Better Care Fund has been extended to 2022-23, and we've assumed this level of funding continues over the life of the medium-term financial strategy, around about £5 million. We've also been allocated some 6.2 million in social care grant for 22-23, which can be applied to either both adults or children's, and those decisions will be made in accordance with the MTFS budget. The overall budget, we have assumed a 2% increase in pay and a 2.5% increase in price inflation. It's probably worth noting that the retail price index for November 21 was some 7.1 million, 7.1%, I do apologize, 7.1%. So there's clearly some pressure on inflation, which is expected to continue throughout 22-23 financial year, but may taper off hopefully as we move forward. One area where Merton has benefited is with the costs of freedom passes, and although the costs are based on a 2-year average trend, bus journeys have reduced by some 80% and tube journeys by some 90% during the spring 21 lockdown. So we're expecting some reduction in costs for Freedom Passes. It's also worth noting that the latest forecast for outturn for 21-22, which obviously could have an impact on reserves, etc., and our basis for the 22-23 and onwards in the medium-term financial strategy. So as at November, we are predicting a net adverse variance of some 7.3 million. That's when all incremental COVID costs are included, and after applying government grants and compensation. This is down from some 8.5 million forecast adverse variance at period 7 in October. There's still some elements of the medium-term financial strategy we still don't know about. For instance, our business rates return, which is called the NNDR1, which will clarify what our business rates income will be for 22-23. That's due for return on the 31st of January, although we are trying to calculate our numbers a bit earlier, but that still remains a figure that we haven't yet nailed down. Also, we haven't determined any sort of CHAS dividend. And of course, the outcome of our discussion with the DFE on our safety valve, obviously those discussions we are awaiting ministerial approval for. But that could have an impact if we were successful on the current financial year, because part of the deal, if we were successful in obtaining one, would be an interim payment of some extra DFE grant in this financial year, which could help with our overspend, our adverse variance position. Though overall, to reiterate, I'm pleased to report a balanced budget position for 2022-23. I think I'll stop there, Chair, and invite John if he wants to comment on the detail of the savings, etc., within the pack for CNH, or to take any questions that may be on the generality of the budget position.
Thank you, Roger. I think I'd like John to add his comments, and then we'll take questions from members.
The only thing, Chair and members, I would like to say is it is an extremely challenging time for adult social care. We hear a lot in the press about the pressures on the NHS and on our hospitals, but that also then has an impact on adult social care and community and housing. So for the community and housing budget, we've seen COVID's had a hit on our income for our libraries. We've had an increase in our people in temporary accommodation, so we're overspending on our housing budget. In adult social care itself, we've seen a 50% increase in discharges from hospital, and that's all having an impact on the budget. The community and housing budget is still showing a slight underspend, but that in part is caused by the extra funding from the NHS around discharges. So last year, the last financial year, we had 6 weeks that turned into a year of funding for everyone leaving hospital. And since March to the 31st of March this year, we've had 4 weeks of funding, which has helped our budget. But it is a challenging time within community and housing. That's all I wanted to add.
Okay, are there any questions? Linda.
I'd like to be taken through the figures in here, please, with a little bit more explanation, if you wouldn't mind. On page 20 on.
Did you catch that, John?
Grateful if we could go through each of the items on here, please, in a little bit more detail.
Which page are we on? Sorry, I'm trying to find the correct page.
Page 20 on the information pack, John.
Apologies, members, I'm not able to find the exact place in the pack. My pack's numbered a different way. So page 20 for me is completely different.
John, it's the detail of the savings being put forward. So the first one being discharge to access, and in sequence after that, the savings that are being proposed.
Particularly because its risk analysis on that particular one is high. I'd like a little bit more of an explanation, please.
Could I ask that Phil comes in just now? Is Phil Howell able to come in and find it for me? I'm really struggling to find the part in the pack.
Would it help, John, if we
Oh,
refer to the
no.
reference CH104? It's adult social care discharge to access savings.
John, it's a saving of £500,000 for 23-24.
Do you want me to come in, Chair, while John's
Please.
finding those pages? So,
Apologise.
yeah, so we're looking at CH reference 110, which is, sorry, no, I've slipped down the page
104.
now.
104.
104. This is the adult social care. This is the discharge to assess proposal. So this in outline is in effect, as John has alluded to, over the last 2 years of the pandemic, there's been a set of national discharge policies put in place. Central to that, and prior to the pandemic, there was an ethos around integrating health and care services at the point of discharge from hospital. So the proposal for the financial year 2023-24 is focused on supporting further the outline principles of the national discharge policy around pathways. Predominantly that's pathways back to people's own home. Beyond that, it's a temporary stay of within perhaps a residential environment, or in a small number of cases, it's discharge from hospital into a permanent placement within adult social care. Within the majority of those people, the emphasis is around home first principle, and the local authority through the reablement service, through our hospital discharge teams, and working with our community health providers, CLCH, have a variety of teams that focus on helping people home from hospital. So the focus of this proposal is about merging all of those different services that work within the hospital discharge arena, both resulting the cashable saving side of things, resulting, we think, from some small scale saving around things like management structures across all of those services, and eking out some of the savings through natural merge of teams, but also alongside that, savings against the long-term placement budget by producing better outcomes, better alternatives for people on the point of discharge compared to long-term placement of care.
How likely it is to be achievable? There's a huge amount out of that budget, isn't it?
It is significant. It is achievable. So there are a variety of models where integrated care happens at the point of discharge across the country, which we can cite to model on. And I would also say that from a Merton perspective, we're in a really good starting point. Our outcomes are good in an individual service sense. From a reablement perspective, we know that 70% of people who go through a reablement service end up needing no further support at the point of discharge from reablement. So we think that, coupled with good integration with health, community health provision, as well as the support of the voluntary community sector that provide support to people on hospital discharge, that yes, we can achieve a better service model and the financial saving.
I think Councillor Kirby's question was also around the risk analysis for deliverability, which is assessed as high. And I don't think you've addressed that issue.
So we've, in terms of the outline EIA, we pitched this as a high risk, given mainly given we don't know all of the full regulation, etc., in relation to ICS development, whether we will receive legislation for integration at various different levels. At the moment, it's very much in policy intention around integration, and there's obviously a market question around this, integrating with a community healthcare provider, and all that brings in terms of the risk analysis of working with other organisations.
But the current model that we run, we have a large enablement team involved in hospital discharge, and our community provider, 2 floors above us, also are involved in discharges. We've done a huge amount of work over the last 2 to 3 years integrating those teams, so that when our hospital colleagues make a referral to us, they make a referral to one place rather than 2 separate teams. These proposals are that we actually do much more integration of those teams to coordinate the service, to make the service better for our residents. As Phil said, it's about 70 to 75% of the people that currently go through our enablement team don't need any care at the end of that. And 3 months after, they don't go into hospital. We think we can do much more enablement work if we work and integrate more with our health colleagues.
Can I ask a question about people who are actually discharged and end up back in hospital? What's the kind of statistic around that? Sorry, it's not a very fair question for you to answer tonight, but I'm just thinking if people are assisted back into their homes and it all works very well, you talked about 75%, I'm thinking about the other 25%, where it doesn't work so well. Are many people actually readmitted into hospital as a result?
We don't, well, I don't have the figures at hand of how many people are readmitted back into hospital, but that is measured by the NHS. The 70 to 75% of people that are discharged through our enablement team that need no care at the end, the 25% that are left, Councillor Kirby, it's about 10% of those need a slightly reduced care package, and the rest of the percentage need the same care package that they were reduced from hospital from. Mark might have some of the details, but he might not have it at hand, how many people are discharged, are admitted back into hospital. Mark, are you able to answer that, or will we circulate those details later?
Yeah, so we definitely do measure readmission rates, and we can go away and get those and circulate those kind of offline. Just to say that I don't think Merton's rates are any higher than anyone else's, and in fact, actually, I am aware of certain boroughs where readmission rates are very high because that gets brought to our attention, and we need to act upon that. I suppose so. I will go away and get the readmission rates for you. The other thing, just to say that in terms of the potential of further integration, is that the health service is absolutely up for that, and as I was speaking to John about how we might make that a reality today. So it's just to say that I think there is further work on the integration agenda that we can do to achieve making sure that we're not duplicating and actually making sure we're making really efficient use of our resources.
Are there any other questions? Oh, Phil, do you want to respond to what's just been raised? Is that why your hand's up?
Yeah, I was just following on, Chair, for that answer. So I have we have an adults outcomes measure, which is not a direct implication of readmission, but we measure the proportion of older people who are still at home 91 days post-discharge, and our figure on that is 82%, which is just below the London score of 84.5, but above the England score. So kind of what Mark was saying, that we're in no different position, and certainly no worse, relatively speaking. It isn't a direct reflection of the number of people who go back into hospital, but our outcomes on reablement are very, very good in comparison. And there will be a proportion of people who it's the right thing to move into a different form of adult social care on discharge.
Thank you. Jennifer.
luck with the. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yes, could I have some more details from page 124 on the CH108 self-funder brokerage? It does say that there will be some generated income from around that. Could we have some sort of explanation of that at all, please? Thank you very much.
Did you catch that, John?
Yes, the saving around the self-funded brokerage. Currently, we have, as part of the CARE Act, we have to offer people a direct payment. That direct payment enables people to buy their own care. So we have that direct payment team that we offer to people that meet the eligibility criteria for our services. Moving forward, in 2023, we have some new legislation, and it's the care cap. Most of you will have heard about it. And for those people that are able to fund their own care, we will be able to assist them to broker that care, and we'll be able to make a small charge on that care. That function will be held within our direct payments team, and we think that we'll be able to generate some income from commissioning that, providing that service for self-funders.
Do that, Jennifer. Thank you. Are there any other questions? I thought Linda's question, the initial question on page 20, also included CH103, if I'm reading it correctly, or is it 105?
105, Chair.
Yeah. I'm going to have to bring my reading glasses to council meetings. John, Linda, was that part of your question, or are you satisfied? No, 105, under the one on page 20 that you asked about.
I was asking about all of that.
Right.
Because, you know, we're here to scrutinise, but it's important to actually understand what people want to think about.
John?
Apologies, Mark, I didn't hear Councillor Kirby. I didn't hear any of it.
There are 1, 2, 3, 4, whoops, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 8 items in here, and we are here to scrutinise. I think it would be helpful to go through each one of them, please. That's what I would like to do, just to understand more fully what they mean. I think one of the problems that you've got as a councillor is these one-liners can hide a multitude of something. And I'd like to know what it is we're actually agreeing to.
Members, I have to apologise. I haven't got the details in front of me, but I will remember them. So if someone reads them out to me, I'll be able to describe them in more detail.
John, if I could
Myself
help.
and Phil will be able to do that.
Yeah,
my pack is incomplete, and I am very sorry that I don't have the details in front of me.
John, it's this one is increasing the take-up of direct payments to deliver improved choice and control our residents and better values for the better value for the council. 100,000 in 22-23, 150,000 in 23-24.
You could just explain what direct payments means and just detail, a little bit more detail, please.
Direct payments relate to the previous saving I was speaking about as well. So this is where, instead of us following assessment, instead of us providing a care package to someone, we give them that cash sum of money called a direct payment, and the resident is able to commission and buy their own care. That is a better way for the resident. It gives them more choice and control over their care. And also it tends to be a little bit cheaper for the council as well. So it's quite cost effective. We have a statutory duty to offer every person a direct payment. And that saving is about increasing the numbers of people that have a direct payment and then are able to commission their own care package. Does that answer it, Councillor Kirby, or do you need more?
At the moment, how many people would that involve?
Well, currently we've got about 350 people receiving a direct payment out of about 1,200 clients. The proposal is that we would increase that number to about 500 people that would have that money to commission their own care. It does give them much more choice and control over their care package. I mean, I can give you a little example. If we commission a care package for someone and provide the care package from our care providers, it tends to be quite fixed. So it might be 7 days a week, 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, lunchtime, evening, and it tends to be quite fixed. If someone has a direct payment, they've got much more choice and control over what they do. So they can have a carer and they can say, oh, I want you tomorrow, but next day I'm not going to have you. Or I don't need the care on Sunday, so they'll cancel the care on Sunday. And it just gives people and families much more flexibility. And that's a saving, of course, as well for them and for the council.
The work to be done with that, would that be one-to-one?
It is, it's all based on the assessment. So new customers coming into the council, again, under the Care Act, we must offer a direct payment. It is a statutory duty that we do that. At review stage as well, when we review, we do an annual review, we would also be looking and discussing the direct payment with the customers as well at that stage.
The next one's about housekeeping, review of ancillary budget lines in the light of changed work patterns, e.g. reduced use of printing travel costs.
Well, that one's quite easy in itself,
Yeah,
of course.
I think that's relatively easy.
We've got much more staff working from home, so they're not using so much transport. We've got less printing. As we've moved towards computers, we're not printing out as much, so that one is quite self-explanatory.
Okay. In the next one, which is libraries and heritage, is increase income collection by reviewing all fees and charges and extending use of space in libraries by third-party providers. And you've got this as a risk analysis of high.
That saving, of course, the main one is increasing income, and we've already started some work on that. I mean, I've updated Scrutiny before that we've got Barclays Bank is now moving into our libraries. Gone are the days when libraries were the place that you went to only borrow books. Our libraries are really hubs of the community. We've got 7 libraries in Merton. Anthony was here, he would tell you we're never further than 1 mile away from our libraries. And it is about getting more community activities within the libraries. So Barclays Bank is opening up 4 days a week across 3 of our libraries in the east of the borough. We've got a business startup opening up in our Mitcham in the east of the borough. And we want to use those spaces as much more community hubs, so much more art spaces. Wimbledon Library is already very successful in their art space, holding large events. And we want those to be happening across the libraries and generate more income for the libraries.
How achievable do you think that might be, given we're still in COVID and a lot of people are not going anywhere?
Well, surprisingly, the libraries had a huge impact on their income during the pandemic. Since September to now, we're nearly at the same levels as we were for income from libraries pre-pandemic. So as Dagmar said, we haven't got a crystal ball. We don't know what the future holds, but if the pandemic goes the way that Dagmar is quietly optimistic it does, we are confident that we'll be able to increase the income in our libraries. We are nearly at the same level as we were before the pandemic.
The next one is commissioning and market development, self-funded brokerage offer. That. So adult social care placements is the next one.
The one before is the one I mentioned earlier on about the care cap. The adult social care placements, that is about utilising reablement. So that is about not a situation where someone comes to adult social care and we take away their independence. It's about working with the customer. It's about utilising health, utilising occupational therapy, utilising reablement to make them as independent as possible, so that they don't need the same level of care package.
All those things actually available? I'm not going to be on.
Well, yes, I mean, we have a large reablement team already. So most of the people that come through hospital that need a care package at the end of hospital, it's about 95% of those go through our reablement team.
Okay.
That same option isn't open just now for the community. So one of the things that we would like to do is increase our reablement team so that we've got someone coming into our front door from the community would have that same level of reablement. Also, it's what we were speaking about in the first question, with our community health provider, that we integrate and do more work with them so that the reablement that someone gets is much more holistic, so that they get that health reablement, that physiotherapist, the occupational therapist, perhaps nurses and GPs reviewing the medication alongside the social care reablement. If we coordinated that a lot better and integrated it slightly, we think it is a possibility.
Thank you. On commissioning and market development, you've got commissioning efficiencies arising from procuring a high cost service.
I'm going to ask Phil if he can come in with that one. Remember, I haven't got them in front of me. Phil, do you remember that one?
Yep, so it's sort of linked to the placement budget as well. So this can be achieved and this is for 23-24. It's a relatively modest saving of 65,000 against the £1.5 million that we spend on the highest cost placements. So part of this is just good housekeeping in the sense of maintaining regular and routine reviews of those services and costs, revisiting some of the high cost placements that are made at the point of individuals being in crisis perhaps, and re-evaluating the outcomes that those people want to achieve over the longer term. So it's really focused on a small proportion of our extremely high cost placements and continuing to get best value for money out of those.
Commissioning and market development, you've got commissioning staff efficiencies. I always find that quite an interesting one.
Well, if we were looking at integrating with our health colleagues, there would be some efficiencies in some of the senior management within those posts. So that savings comes from that.
Does that mean any redundancies?
Well, currently in adult social care and across the system, we've got a huge shortage of staff. So the first thing we would be looking at is redeployment, because I mean, there is a major workforce challenge across the sector, health and social care. So we have got posts to move people to.
Any more questions, Linda?
No.
Okay. Do any other members have questions that they would like or explanations sought? Okay. So, is there anything that you would like to add, Roger or John, in relation to this item?
Nothing more from me, Chair.
Nothing more from me, Chair.
Okay. Sorry, Helena.
Sorry, Chair, I had issues with my hand function on Zoom. Chair, I have a question about a cut in a different proposed department. I assume this is not the place that should be raised. And I'm just conscious we do have the cabinet member here.
I think if it's the responsibility of another scrutiny panel, then it should be raised there. And there are a whole series of these meetings to go through all of these items.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. So the recommendations are set out in on page 23. So we've considered the proposed amendments, savings, and the draft business plan. And are there any issues on the capital program? No. Okay. and the draft savings we've just been discussing, and the equalities analysis is included there. And the contents of the members' information pack, which has been circulated, and then overview and scrutiny commission considers the comments received. Are there any general comments? I mean, I think the savings required in this year are relatively modest, and it's next year, I think, that the problem will be. But are there any comments that you would like us to convey to the overview and scrutiny commission? I mean, we've got the chair of the commission with his pen poised and his beady eye on us, and he will have noted any of the questions that have emerged. And I thank Linda for raising the questions that she has, so that we do get a more detailed understanding of the proposed savings. Anything else that anyone would like to add? Okay, well then we have concluded our discussion of that item. The next item is the Safeguarding Adults Annual Report, which has been circulated with the agenda, and we have Aileen Buckton, the chair of the Safeguarding Board, here to present this report. Aileen, thank you for your patience in sitting through the other items that we've had to go through. Please go ahead and introduce this report for us.
Thank you, Chair. And in fact, I found the kind of agenda very interesting, because obviously there are safeguarding kind of elements of a great deal of what's been discussed. But I'm here tonight to present to you, and I thank you for the opportunity to do so, the Adult Safeguarding Annual Report for 2021. And as has been kind of said so many times this evening, I guess that I'd start by saying that, you know, the general context was that the board was overseeing adult safeguarding during the pandemic, and that raised for us so many new issues and demanded from us new ways of working. I mean, one of the things about safeguarding is that so many safeguarding concerns come from people's families, from their relatives who might visit a care home, or from professionals who are kind of going into people's homes, or social workers who are visiting homes or working with providers. So you get a lot of kind of concerns from face-to-face work, one-to-one work. And of course, none of those mechanisms were in place during the pandemic. And we had to find other ways of listening to what people were saying. And it was interesting that there was a kind of increase in referrals from the community, of neighbours and families who were concerned about their loved ones, or neighbours who perhaps hadn't seen somebody and were worried. And it was good to see that the community kind of responded, and we had a kind of higher rate of referral than we normally get, because normally referrals come from professional staff. So that's just a kind of way of a backdrop. But just to say something about, firstly, what the report deals with is some of the work that we said that we would undertake during that year. I won't apologise for the fact that it may not seem like the most exciting kind of areas of work that we were trying to tackle, but I think that we felt that they were really important. In the safeguarding world, because it's kind of partnership working, you get a lot of kind of changes in terms of the membership of the board. Every 6 months or so, there might be new people who come along. And what's important, I think, is that we have kind of systems and accountability that everybody can become familiar with straight away and know how the board works. And it helps us then to be able to kind of welcome new members, and that they can kind of hit the ground running with their partnership contribution. So we did undertake quite a lot of internal process work on the board itself, of actually developing some new objectives, which you will see outlined in the report. We looked at the way that serious cases are reviewed, and the way in which decisions are made as to whether those cases should go forward to be full-blown safeguarding inquiries. We've done a lot of work about data, of making sure that we have talked to all of our partners, so that in this current year we are receiving data from all of our partners and not just from the council. We had a particular lens on looking at protected characteristics and the data, and in particular we have been looking at ethnicity and looking at the kind of rates of safeguarding referrals in relation to particular communities across Merton. And, you know, we are beginning to see a pattern of underrepresentation in terms of safeguarding referrals amongst some of the Asian kind of residents in the borough, and an overrepresentation in terms of African Caribbean families in particular. Now, it's early days in terms of that data, and I don't want to kind of emphasize it, but we are looking, therefore, to do some kind of deeper analytical work. But during that year, we started a whole new way of looking at data and data analysis. And what went along with that as well is actually drawing together a quality assurance programme for the board, having a training strategy, of looking at different ways in which we might have a programme of work that looks at accountability. So you will see those processes outlined both from individual member organisations of partners and what they were doing in relation to those changes, but in the board itself. You will then see in the report there is a section on partners themselves telling us what they did during that year and what was the kind of emphasis for them. And obviously it picks up on some of the COVID related work. And I was very pleased to see actually some real understanding of the needs of staff across our partner agencies. It was tough. It was tough for staff working out there, of not being able to get their usual access in work with kind of families, in not being able to work in the kind of same way with their colleagues in the office, sometimes feeling quite isolated, and sometimes feeling kind of unsure, and making sure that they had kind of access to the information and support that they require through a very different way of working. And you will see there one or two examples of Central London Community Health actually doing some additional kind of training for staff, some additional support sessions for staff, some very good work in the council of recognising the concerns that there were amongst Black and Asian minority ethnic communities, where there was a higher prevalence in that first kind of wave of COVID, and very much at the time as well of Black Lives Matter, and the concerns that staff had about that, and some kind of additional sessions for staff to be able to talk about those issues and be able to talk about the impact that it had upon them, because there is a direct relevance to staff feeling confident and sure about what they're doing in relation to recognising safeguarding issues. So I think that you will see that kind of reflected in the partners' contributions as well as the work that they undertook. There is then a section in the report that looks at the work. We have 4 subgroups to the partnership, and you will see some of the work that they have been undertaking, and some of that work reflects the overhaul we did of the partnership itself, and how that work is kind of moving forward. And then in the report, there is a particular section on looking at COVID and the impact of COVID in particular, because it did impact on safeguarding issues. So we have done quite a lot of work, for example, with colleagues looking at domestic abuse, because what we saw in the borough and we saw across London was a rise in domestic abuse referrals, particularly to voluntary sector organisations, and the fantastic work that they did during that kind of period of making sure that the statutory agencies were aware of that rise. And we've done quite a lot of work since then, but looking at those kind of issues began during the year 2021. And another example, I think, some very, very good work that went on in care homes. And when Dagmar was talking earlier this evening about the way in which there has been communication with the care homes about outbreaks in this kind of recent period over the last few weeks of outbreaks in care homes, I saw the evidence during 2021 of really laying the foundation of working with care homes and making sure that every care home had somebody who worked with them, who talked to them constantly, who looked at all the kind of support that they needed. I mean, Merton was at the forefront of making sure that care homes had the right protective equipment that they needed, making sure that they knew how to kind of still make safeguarding referrals, making sure that they got all their questions answered in relation to vaccinations, and, you know, in relation to kind of visiting, and all of that work that took place, I think has really kind of reaped huge kind of benefits. And you can really see, I think, a difference in that working during this current time. And the report then goes on to talk a little bit about something that's very important to us on the board, which is about making sure that safeguarding is personal. So when abuse might have taken place or has taken place, that families and victims of abuse and harm feel that they actually have some say in what they're seeking, and that their kind of views are addressed, and that they kind of feel that at the end of the safeguarding process. And so we have included some individual stories in the report that kind of reflect some real cases in Merton of where the workers were kind of attempting to work with victims and their families in terms of what would actually work for them in redressing some of the things that had happened to them. And I think then also just right at the end of the report, which is the kind of statutory responsibility of just looking at some of the learning from safeguarding reviews. I mean, during that year, there wasn't a publication of a formal safeguarding review, but there was learning from one that had taken place in the previous year. And one of the things that we are working very hard on is making sure that we understand and we learn from things that have gone wrong in the past, and that we also work across our partner organisations to make sure that learning is taking place on the front line, and that we get some kind of reassurance back. So overall, Chair, what I would say is that the role of the board has been business as usual. Safeguarding did not go away during that period, but we've tried to work in a different sort of way. We've tried to work alongside our partners and not to put additional burdens on them, because they're actually working under very stressful circumstances, but at the same time to continue to ask questions and ask them to come and talk to us, to reassure ourselves as a partnership that we're doing everything that we can to keep residents safe from harm and abuse across Merton. And I'll stop there, Chair. Thank you. And I think Phil and John are obviously members of the board, and might want to also kind of comment on any questions that that you might have.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions on this report? Yes. Do you want to put your mic on, please?
Okay.
So this is Councillor Joan Henry.
Right, okay, thank you. Okay, I just got my papers this afternoon, so I'm just really skimming through them. Thank you for your report. On page 113, 5.2, location of risk. Okay, you're showing the location of risk, which is in the home for 63%. What kind of risk were they? And yeah, what kind of risk were there? Was it high risk, low risk? Or what is the cause of those risks? Thanks.
This is the safeguard. I think I might have got a slightly different number. Is this about safeguarding concerns in people's own homes, Councillor? Sorry, was that your question?
Yes, in people's home, yes. Thanks.
Yes, I think one of the things, and in a way you would expect this during the kind of COVID period, there was quite a steep rise in the number of safeguarding concerns that were about people living in their own homes. I guess partly because relatives and neighbours, I think, were very concerned about, people that they couldn't see. So there was a huge kind of rise in those sorts of concerns, but also because people were spending so much more time together at home, sometimes in very crowded circumstances, in very stressful circumstances. So you might expect that those level of referrals to go up, and they did. They were a range of concerns, but primarily it was about concerns around neglect, either self-neglect or neglect from carers, or concerns about mental health issues. Obviously, there were concerns about domestic abuse. Sorry, excuse me. So there were a kind of range of concerns, and the height of that risk is obviously dependent. The way we deal with that is not to kind of rate them as those referrals come in, but to go through a system as to whether that safeguarding referral should be taken further. Sometimes it's just a question of actually making sure that whoever's raised the concern, they might need more information or to be referred to another agency, and it's not really a kind of safeguarding concern, and we can deal with it in a different kind of way. But if it is a safeguarding concern, then it should be, and it is right that it should get taken further. And there's various kind of stages that those referrals might go through, and some, where there has been a particular set of circumstances, end in a formal review. So in a roughly 50%, about 45% to 50% of the concerns that were raised were going ahead to be looked at in more detail. And that's the kind of percentage that I would look to see. I mean, that makes me feel that actually referrals are being taken very seriously, they're being considered seriously, but also we're not clogging up the system, we're also dealing with referrals that don't need to be safeguarding concerns in other ways. So that's the way in which they get rated as to whether they're high risk or not.
Are there any other questions? Linda.
Comment, is that okay? I just thought it's really an interesting report, and I think congratulations to all the partnerships really in here, because that has been, and has been for the last couple of years, really a very difficult time. I thought the individual cases in there were really well put together. It was good to get those that included. Well done.
There's a bit of positive feedback for you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I'll pass that on to the partnership.
Sorry. Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. This is a great report. I am pleased to see this, but I've noticed this is mainly on adults. Do you also work with the social services of the young people? Thank you.
As it happens, during this current year, not in the year that the report refers to, but I am at the moment the chair for the Children's Partnership as well, and so we are looking actually at some joint work between kind of adult safeguarding and children and young people safeguarding, because sometimes things that go wrong often go wrong during that transition as young people move into being in receipt of adult services, or indeed becoming young adults, and some of the things that they have to face. So I think there's a real opportunity. This is actually just adults because it's the Adult Partnership Board, but I think there is a real kind of opportunity, and we have some plans over the next few months to run some events and some sessions of actually looking at children and young people as they move into transition into adulthood, but also looking at more kind of family work, think family work of actually looking at kind of parents and children and the way in which services work together and don't work in kind of divided ways in relation to kind of adults and children's services. So it's you know, good to raise it, and I hope next time to be able to kind of report on that joint work.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? I had one that I was looking in particular at the safeguarding adults reviews or the review, and the issue that you identified is the understanding of mental capacity. Could you just elaborate on the concerns that you had about the understanding which led to additional training of partner agencies?
I think, yes, Joe, that's an interesting question, because we've actually done quite a lot of work on mental capacity. And I think perhaps a good example is you will see in a lot of safeguarding reviews, not just the kind of work that was done in Merton, but nationally and across London, that residents sometimes are thought to have and deemed to have mental capacity to make decisions for themselves. But the decisions that they make are not necessarily ones that keep them safe. So if you think about, and this was in the whole arena of self-neglect, and perhaps something like hoarding, or where people are kind of really so neglectful of themselves that they put themselves at risk from harm. What we have been doing some work on, and what that case kind of really looked at, was at what point can a social worker or a medical kind of person of any kind who's working with that person, at what point should they start to think, well, actually, is there something more that can be done here? Because this is somebody who is putting themselves at risk, even though they are deemed, you know, that they say that this is how they want to lead their lives, this is what they want to do, but actually it's harmful. And it's a kind of very difficult legal ground. It's a kind of difficult ground to find a way around it. And sometimes the cases are really very complex and it's quite difficult to change people's behaviour. But what we've been doing is, how can we look at mental capacity in different sorts of ways? We want people to be able to make full use of their capacity that they have, but we also want to ensure that we are not just kind of walking away from situations where people harm themselves to the point where they actually lose their lives or damage themselves in, you know, in some sort of permanent way. So that's what the work was about, Chair. And there is quite a lot to draw on from kind of other national safeguarding reviews. It's a very sort of key issue, and one that we've taken into our work programme for this year.
Thank you, Joan.
Thank you. Right, thank you, Chair. Okay, I'm looking at page 115, and say completed inquiries where risks were identified, none. Risk removed or reduced, and that figure is there. Risk remains 26.7%. Right, okay. I'm not understanding this section. Could you just explain it to me in details? Because risk removed or reduced, that means you're not sure whether they remain or they reduce. So can you please explain that, and how you're going to address the risk that remains?
But this very much relates, Councillor, to what I was just talking about. Actually, it is kind of precisely that. So you can work with somebody where there are safeguarding concerns, and actually through that work take away the issues that were potentially causing harm to that person, and actually they are able then to move on in a very different kind of way. Sometimes you can work with a family or with somebody and you partly address some of the issues, but there is a risk, and that's what it's referring to, where you've partly kind of dealt with it, but some of the issues may arise again. So it may be that if you're working with somebody with a long history of mental health difficulties, that could be an instance where you can only partially take away the harm because it may happen again. And that tells you something about the way in which you then need to move forward and continue to try to support and work with that person. And then there are instances, as I was just talking about in terms of mental capacity, where you may well try an initiative, but actually you're not able to take away the harm because the person concerned isn't able to engage with the support or help that's kind of offered to them. And obviously that then dictates for you a very different way of how can we handle this in a different sort of way, because the person isn't prepared to make any kind of changes to their life that is potentially causing them harm, which is why I was saying we've been doing some extra training to look at how you might turn some of those situations around. So that's what that kind of risk analysis session is about, really, because you won't always be able to take away harm from everybody in a satisfactory way. And the important thing for me is, what does that then tell you in terms of the agencies involved with that person about how they should go on focusing their work and picking up on the fact that there is still some risk here. We haven't been able to totally solve the problem. We need to actually carry on working in a very sort of targeted way.
Any other questions or comments? In that case, I think we should note the report and thank those responsible for this important piece of work on behalf of our community. Thank you, Aileen, for providing that introduction and answering all our questions.
Thank you, Chair.
So item 8 is the Cabinet Member priorities, and we have Rebecca here with us, and she sat patiently through our discussion, but I don't think she'll be entirely disinterested in what's been going on either. But would you like to provide your verbal update, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to present my priorities for adult social care and public health. I appreciate that these have been a long time coming. You may recall that I was going to present these on the Council's first attempt at a hybrid meeting, and I looked back and that was on the 21st of June last year. Reflecting on the technical issues tonight, I wonder if I might be the cause recurring. But while I'm sure you'd agree that much has changed over the last 7 months, on reflection, my short, medium and longer term priorities for our residents haven't materially changed over that time. And my overarching vision, which was a collaborative response to recovery post-COVID with a focus on resilience and on inequalities, hasn't changed either. So I'll briefly take you through what those priorities look like, but as always, welcome questions at the end. So it will come as no surprise to colleagues that my immediate priority is COVID. Look at us here almost 2 years on, masks, social distancing, hybrid working, testing and a booster dose. COVID isn't going away. And while we need to learn to live with it, there are still areas that we need to learn from and to prioritise. But I do think that we should also celebrate our successes, some of which are quite unique to Merton, such as being the only borough in South West London where the Department of Health and Social Care didn't need to intervene. Our care home vaccination rates were, or how we were one of the first boroughs to quickly mobilise designated settings for care home residents who were discharged from hospital who were COVID positive, or even how we set up a community hub in just 5 days. I think what's key here, and I'll come back to it when I talk to medium-term priorities, is how working with partners, whether that's the voluntary sector or the NHS, was absolutely critical to that success. But why COVID also remains an immediate priority to me is rooted in inequity, and that some of the key groups with low uptake are those from parts of the borough where there are high levels of deprivation, some of our younger people, and also some of our communities from certain ethnic groups. And that's why, as a health and wellbeing subgroup, we've refocused our remit on barriers to vaccination, also called vaccine hesitancy. And we're working with partners across Merton to help meet the social, cultural, and linguistic needs of our residents. And I think in the longer term, vaccination equity also needs to be embedded into our fair recovery strategy as a council, to ensure that we're continuing to focus on how we bridge the gap across all departments. This also means using learnings from COVID to work closely with partners to improve other areas, such as uptake of other vaccines and screening programs, which I know that the Liberal Democrat group has raised and raised at council, but also prioritising projects that seek to take healthcare to where our residents are, such as our Health on the High Street pilot, which should be starting shortly. Moving on to medium-term priorities, I'm also keen that we learn from our experience of COVID as we recover, with a focus on developing resilient communities. And what do I think we should learn from? I think we need to learn from how some people want to receive care, who they trust, and how they interact with our community. And leveraging, as John mentioned earlier, some of our non-health assets like our libraries and our community centres, to ensure that people who may not want to access traditional healthcare settings are still supported. And that's why Health on the High Street is really important, as is the Health and Wellbeing Hub or the Wilson, or however we decide to define it. And I think Councillor Dollimore's question was a really important one, because I don't actually think it should be us that should be defining that. And previously we were going out to the community to ensure that the Wilson would be named or defined by the community, and I think it's the same approach that we will need to take. But the Health on the High Street comes first, and it's a pilot that I hope would serve as a model as to what the Wilson could look like. And the Health on the High Street also fits into what residents told us was their greatest ambition for Merton in the Your Merton consultation. So that was creating a thriving community hub high street. But it also means that we can take health services to where people are, rather than expecting them to come to us, whether that's out shopping or getting a coffee or picking up their children. But at the same time, such services mustn't distract from the core services provided by health and care. So physical access to GP services, for instance, or timely referral to hospital, those sorts of services should supplement them. And looking forward, we have a real opportunity to shape what post-pandemic care looks like in Merton, building on those partnerships both in South West London, also in Merton. And that's particularly true as we transition to integrated care systems, or the ICS. As colleagues will be aware, we're moving to this new way of working now in July 2022. So that'll be NHS hospital trusts, primary care networks, community care providers, mental health providers, social care, public health, and the voluntary sector coming together to agree what care and health will look like across South West London, but also here in Merton. And I think what's really important for us is how we ensure this continued focus on place, so how we get the best for Merton, and how our priorities to reduce inequalities, as the chair mentioned earlier, but also to invest in prevention and independence, are at the heart of our partnership working. And a core part of what prevention and independence means to me, particularly in the context of smaller budgets, but also with the question mark over where public health will sit in the future, particularly now that we know that Public Health England has been disbanded, is how we develop resilient communities across Merton. I think two really good examples of how we've done that to date and how we're continuing to do that are firstly with our learning disability community, with whom we've been undertaking an extensive piece of consultation work and engagement to find out what they want to see from their daycare. So yes, that's about retaining traditional daycare services and daycare centres within Merton, but it's also listening to their hopes for a weekend offer or an evening offer. And also looking at our multi-agency carer strategy, which launched last year, which not only saw the introduction of a carer's emergency card and doubled the discretionary carers grant, but also put our carers at the heart of defining what they need and leading that process, rather than us dictating what that would look like. And all of these priorities that I've mentioned take us to what I see as our ambition in the longer term as well: bridging the gap, resilience, and partnership working. But to get us there, we need to start looking at how we tackle some of the root causes of poor health and care outcomes, which also often have an overlap with risk factors for COVID. So that's looking at tackling things like unhealthy diets, which covers not only obesity, but also malnutrition and food poverty. It's also about how we look at improving the air we breathe and creating a cleaner and greener environment, So investing in cycle infrastructure, developing an electric vehicle strategy, and also reflecting on the successes, but also learnings of things such as low traffic neighbourhoods and school streets. So in summary, I hope you can see something of a red thread running throughout. I think my two core priorities, both for now and for the future, are building resilience and tackling inequalities, and doing both of those things so that we can strengthen our community. And there'll be many different ways of how we'll do that, but I think those two themes should be at the heart. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Rebecca. Are there any questions? Stun them into silence. So is that, am I correct in assuming that you approve of the strategy that's been outlined? Joan, you have a question.
Not a question, it's a compliment. I just want to say well done and thank you very much, Rebecca. Thank you.
Okay, well, we thank you. I think Joan has summarised it. So, and we're also very grateful to you for coming along and staying so late to provide us with that report. So thank you very much for all you have done. So that brings us on to item 9, the work programme. Can we note the work programme? I'm very conscious that I've gone over 2 hours and that's unusual for me, so I must apologise, but we've had some pretty meaty items on our agenda and I felt we needed to give them a good airing and give you the opportunity to ask all the questions that you had of the officers. So we note the work programme. Having done so, I'll declare the meeting closed and thank you all for your attendance and for your contributions this evening. And I will say that, you know, despite the fact that things seem to be getting better, I do hope you will all keep safe and we'll be able to meet again in more pleasant circumstances before very long without the